Hey guys, this is John Carr and I'm here for Vince doing another post tutorial. I want to talk about one of my favorite features of After Effects CS6, the brand new 3D camera tracker. So we're going to jump in. This is going to be the shot that we're going to work on. This is a shot of downtown LA that Vince shot via a helicopter a few years back. And I thought it'd be a perfect shot to showcase the new camera tracker. So let's jump into After Effects. Import file. Let's import that shot. And I'm going to drag it down to create a new comp. So we're going to do two things. We're going to create what is most common 3D text, which you'll see on TV shows like Fringe. You saw it on Heroes, and I believe the opening credits of Zombieland even incorporated this. And then we're going to take it to the next step and incorporate the 3D camera tracker using or to do some visual effects on this particular shot. So 3D camera tracker, super easy to use. We're going to right click the clip. We're going to select track camera, and it's going to pop up this blue ribbon much like the warp stabilizer of After Effects 5.5. It's going to go through and analyze each of the frames of this particular scene. I'm going to duck out and I'll come back when it's done analyzing the shot. Alright, the 3D camera tracker is done, and you can see throughout the city we've got these multicolored points. And you can also see the bullseye that pops up as we kind of hover along this scene. Now, the colors don't represent anything. It's just a nice way to be able to differentiate between all these points. So you can see that these points are sticking to the scene very nicely, and the bigger the tracking points, the closer they are to the camera. So you can see these buildings in the distance, they're quite small, and obviously this building here in the foreground, the tracking points are quite large. So it's a good way to keep track of things. You can also adjust the size by coming over here and pulling them down, bringing them up if you want them to be bigger, which is nice. So let's take a look. Let's dig into some of the settings. I'm going to scroll down the Advanced tab, and what you can see here, this is the most important thing, the average error. Now this is 0.71, and that's really good for a scene. The average error represents the average distance between the 3D solve points and the 2D track points. So these are the 3D solve points. Now we can check out the 2D solve points by selecting 2D source, and they're a little bit harder to see. Let's boost the size a bit. And this is what the camera tracker is using to simulate and estimate where the camera is. And these points are the points that are being used to create the 3D points. Now, if you have some issues, if you're not getting a very good number here, anything, and I would consider a not very good number, anything over 1 is starting to become a little bit questionable, and your tracks are going to slide a bit. And a way that you can adjust, I'm actually going to go through a couple different ways that you can get in here and tweak some of the settings to help your overall solve. But let's say, for instance, I have something coming through this shot. Maybe there's a helicopter flying through, and there's points attaching to it, and it's throwing off the entire track. So what I can do is I could go in, just using the lasso tool, I could select several points, go in and delete those points if need be, and just make sure that they're off of the helicopter and it's not using that information to solve the camera. Some additional things that we can do is we can go in, and if it's a zoom lens, we can come down, and instead of keeping it on fixed angle of view, we could come down to variable zoom. The shot doesn't need it. And then finally, we also have the option of, and I use auto detect out of the gate traditionally, but a typical scene, maybe something that's a handheld shot, mostly flat, there's not a lot of parallax going on, there's not a lot of movement, camera's fairly stationary, and then tripod pan. So if it's on a tripod, you're panning, maybe you're tilting, you could use this, and it's going to help basically break down and just give a little bit more information to the camera tracker. And then a final note, I'm not going to get into this. Google Able Cine for angle of view. They've got a wonderful resource on their site. And if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty, this is a good piece of information you can drop into the scene. And it's all based on basically the sensor size of your camera and lenses and things of that nature. So, and those will be additional options to help you get in here and solve the camera. But since we're at 0.71, I'm going to stick with it. I'm very happy with this solve. And let's jump in and create some of that text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back into the 3D solve points. Let's reduce the size a bit because they're awfully large. And I'm just going to go in. I'm going to select one of these points. And then I'm going to hold down the left mouse button which brings up the lasso tool. I'm going to select all these points on the roof, and you can see this bullseye appears, and the bullseye sticks pretty well to the top of this building. So I'm going to right click, and I'm going to select Create Text and Camera. Now what this does is it creates the text you can see here, and if you want to get rid of these tracking points, just come down here, select in the timeline, and that will deselect the camera tracker. Let's select this text and let's do some adjustments. First of all, I'm going to drag it over so I can see it. Just double click on the text and we're going to change it. So we're going to say Los Angeles. Obviously it is too big, so let's go in here, let's hit S for scale, and let's scale this down. It's a bit much. All right, I like it. All right, so I'm going to position this over the heliport. That looks good, and let's go into the orientation. The X orientation, I'm going to select 90 to have it standing upright, and let's just scroll through. It's sticking really nice to the top of the building. I'm going to drag it up just a little bit, and I like it. All right, so let's work on playing around with this. Let's go back to this original clip, select the 3D camera tracker, and that's going to bring up all your tracking points again. I'm going to hide this Los Angeles text momentarily, and I'm going to get in here and I'm going to select these points one more time. Right click and say Create Shadow Catcher and Light. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a shadow to that text, and this is a really easy way to do it. So what happened is there was a light created, and then there's also basically a solid that you can't see that's going to catch this shadow. It's going to create a ground plane where this shadow is going to be hitting, and I'll show you what that's all about momentarily. So let's bring back our text. And you can see immediately, just bring this a little bit closer to us. You can see immediately that we've got our light, which is creating a shadow from this text. Now it's also hitting our text. You can see our text has gone from gray, our text has gone from white to gray. You can shut that off by going to the material options and selecting accept light and clicking off, and then it's going to go back to white, so that light will not affect the text. But I'm going to leave it on. We're going to need that momentarily, and let's go into our light options, and let's work on the diffusion. I feel like that's a little too sharp for my liking, so I'm going to diffuse it, going down to 400. I feel like it's a little bit too dark, so let's drop that to 60, and that kind of helps soften the shadow. Now the problem that we have right now is this ground plane is so large that it's running off the actual heliport. So we need to correct that. I'm going to select the shadow catcher, and let's go to ellipse tool, and let's drag out an ellipse mask. Which will allow us to create the edges that match the helipad. All right, so that looks pretty good, and so we don't have that running off the edge, and as we saw, it's sticking pretty nicely to the roof. Now the next thing that we can do, and this is also new in After Effects CS6, is we have the ability to go to a different renderer. So we're in the classic 3D renderer right now. And with that, if we switch over to Ray Trace 3D, we have the ability to extrude this text into 3D. So I'll show you what that's all about. Now, the downside of this is you need a pretty beefy machine. You could use an NVIDIA Quadro 4000 card as well as some serious processing power with your computer. In order to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to select this button, and you can see it's just bogging down my system. And I'm going to go to Fast Draft. You can see it's going to drop this resolution very low, but it's going to allow me to navigate throughout these settings quite a bit faster. So let's go into the text, and by turning on the Ray Trace 3D, this is going to give me some additional options, including geometry options. So let's go down to the geometry options, and we have the ability to do extrusion depth. So I'm going to select 100. Actually, let's go a little bit more. Let's go 200. And you can see it's extruding this text out. So let's zoom in, and there you can see we've got some extrusion going on, which is really cool. We can create a little bit of bevel on the front, and then we have the ability to go in and change the material options and adjust how the light is affecting this extrusion. So like I said, very processor intense. This little scene, which is probably just a few seconds long, took me about 2 hours to render out, but I actually did render out a pass so you guys could see what it looks like. And here we go. So right out of Fringe, they do this almost every episode, introducing where they are for that particular week. So it looks pretty good. We got a nice little shadow going in. We could play around with the light to make it sit into this scene a little bit better. But new in After Effects CS6, we've got this extrude, which is really cool. All right, so let's take it to the next level. I'm going to go back to our 3D Classic to make it a little bit easier on my system. And let's create a visual effect. So I'm going to hide that text, and let's say Vince came to me and said, you know what, I need this to be number 10. This is helipad number 12. I actually need it to be number 10. Can you fix this for me? And there's a ton of different ways you can go about this and do this. I'm going to try to do it fairly fast and simple. I'm going to utilize Photoshop. But the main thing I want to do is I want to utilize this info palette here. And I want to make sure I keep track of two colors, this white and this red. So let's make a note of this. I'm going to go inside and select this pixel here with the pointer, and just keep in mind the RGB values. I've got a 154 for red, green is 152, 154, 152, and blue is 150. And let's take a look at the red. We've got a 114, 73, and 75. So just making note of those. I'm going to jump into Photoshop. And let's create a new document. Let's call it Helipad. We're going to go 500 by 500 pixels, 72. That's good. And the first thing let's do, let's unlock the background, and we're going to select this color, and let's enter in our RGB values. Let's start with the white, 154, 152, and 150. So it's actually not white, it's more of a gray. Let's go to the paint bucket tool and fill in that layer. So that gives us our background color. Now, I'm going to select the ellipse tool. Let's go into the color, and we'll go 114, 73, 75. And let's start up in the right hand, actually the left hand corner, holding down Shift, dragging out. Let's go to the edge. And what I've done is I've shut off the fill. I'm just doing a stroke. It's at 40 points, and that gives us our circle for our helipad. So the final thing that we need to do is go in to the text, and let's make sure that's deselected, and let's go 10. There's our 10. Get it in the center. Now it's looking good. I like the look of that. So let's save it. Helipad. Good. Back to After Effects. Let's import it in. I'm going to merge the layers. That's fine. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this footage layer, our plate layer, one final time. Select these guys on the helipad. Right click, and I'm going to create a null. So this is our track. Let's go back to our helipad. Just drag it in. All right. So what we'll do is let's create a mask. What I need to do, I was kind of lazy. I didn't really account for the texture on this helipad, and if I were to just drop this in over the top, you would really see that it doesn't blend well because there's a lot of different variations in color on this helipad, and with this ring it's a nice point of contrast that I can kind of get away with it and be lazy on this shot. So let's create a mask. I'm going to start up in the corner once again like I did in Photoshop. I'm going to hold down Shift, drag out. That's going to constrain to a circle. Let's drag to the edge. That looks good. I like it. I'm going to create a little bit of a feather there. Let's do 10 pixels. And all right, so how do we get it into our scene? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to make it a 3D layer. So that immediately puts it in the wrong place. Now, probably one of my favorite things about After Effects CS6 is the ability to use the pick whip to orient things in 3D space based on nulls, or based on position of nulls or text or whatever. So I'm going to select the pick whip. I'm going to hold down Shift and drag it to that null that we created. Let it go, and boom, drops it right in position perfectly, which is awesome. You don't have to worry about Z and X and kind of fumbling around in 3D space to align your element. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to rotate it. That looks good. Drag it up here. All right, and it's not a perfect match. I could spend a little bit of time tweaking this color to match a little bit better with the outer ring, but for the most part it's pretty easy, and like I said, I'm just being lazy. So the final thing that I will do is I will turn on motion blur. That will help create and blur some of the movement, and I want to do an additional Gaussian blur because it is quite a bit sharp in comparison to the overall scene. So let's do 25, maybe a bit much, 15, and that helps match. And there we go. So we have officially changed it to helipad number 10. So pretty easy. So 3D camera tracker is awesome. You can do really cool things with it. Background replacement. Obviously, you can drop in text to scenes. Super helpful with visual effects, and it's really easy to use. So I hope you guys have a better understanding of how to utilize this great plugin. To learn about what I've got going on, follow me on Twitter at JON_car. And if you're not following Vincent LaForêt, you guys are crazy. He's got tons of useful information and always has some cool things going on. So follow him on Twitter as well. Appreciate you guys taking some time to check out this tutorial. And thanks a lot. We'll talk to you soon.